Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Writer's Hive. Today, we're going to be talking about when to call yourself a writer. And this was a suggestion from Jessica Gibson, who commented on one of our videos asking when we call ourselves a writer, or the pivotal moment when we decided that we could or should call ourselves a writer. So we decided to talk about that because there is a lot of internal struggle that goes along with when to identify or when you can finally call yourself a writer or an author. So we're going to discuss that topic today. Katlyn, do you want to tackle the topic first?
Sure. I have a lot of feelings about this topic, and it was something that I struggled with early on in my publication process. Calling myself a writer versus an author, which is what I sort of think about when I think about this question. In terms of a writer, I never really thought of myself as a writer or author until I actually became invested in getting published. And I was a writer for a while I was writing my debut novel. And then once that publication day hit for me, I officially called myself an author. But I know there are a lot of people who use these words interchangeably. And some people will say I'm an aspiring author if they are someone who is in that writer process. But I think it's just all in how you feel, and there's no right or wrong answer. If you are doing the work, if you are writing, you are a writer. It was just my own, I don't know if it was self-doubt about what I thought of as an author or a writer when I see people on the bookshelves or on social media. So that's the way that I describe it to myself.
How about you, Amber?
Yeah, I kind of look at it the same way as Kate. I called myself a writer from when I was, like a teenager writing poetry and everything. So I've always kind of called myself a writer. The first time I decided to write a story, which I believe I was like 10 or 11, I still have a problem calling myself an author just because I'm not traditionally published. I have self-published before, but I didn't, when I self-published before, I didn't put the time and effort in that I should have. And so I've taken those down. So I don't really think of myself as an author. I do kind of say like aspiring author because I do want to eventually get traditionally published. So I struggle with that one as well with the author word.
Which makes sense. I'll share kind of my process, and then I wanted to kind of delve into a little bit of a different discussion too, just around that. But always called myself a writer. I've always been a writer, whether I was journaling or just kind of trying to get my feelings out. I've been writing little poems or stories since I can remember. So in terms of claiming the term of writer, it never felt like this big, grand, unattainable thing to me personally. It's always been something that I've worked on. It's always been a passion of mine. So it's not like I've had a hard time claiming that. And then when I had the online women's magazine and I was publishing articles all the time, or the magazine was being sold internationally and across bookstores or on the shelves next to Oprah magazine, I didn't necessarily call myself an author at that point because it was articles and I was a businesswoman and I was writing articles. I was published, but I was a published writer at that point. I wasn't still calling myself an author. And then I did self-publish a book of flash fiction and poetry. And at that point, I did claim being an author. But for me, being a writer was just kind of inherent. It was just who I was. It was kind of like being a reader. It was just something that I'd always done. The title of author felt a lot more coveted. And that to me, I was okay saying when I had self-published. I think it's taken on a little bit of a different meaning now as I am going forward with publishing a full-length novel as opposed to flash fiction and poetry. So being in the process of putting out my first actual novel feels really powerful too. And the title of author has taken on a little bit of even a different meaning. And then as I query to traditionally publish, I'm sure the word author will take on even a new level of meaning. I don't think it means only one thing. There's a ton of different ways to be an author, at least in my eyes. It's nuanced, right? Like there's a ton of different people who write a ton of different things. So if you are a poetry writer and you get a poem published in an anthology, are you a published writer or are you an author at that point? Like, I don't know. I think everybody has different ways to define that based on the kind of writing they do and what they see their path to success being.
I think in my head, I kind of think of author as not necessarily a published writer, even though I do kind of. It's more of like writing for like a career is like an author, like somebody that's trying to write for a career. And so like for me, I want to be traditionally published, but I don't think that someone who has self-published and put the work in and had editors and like really done that shouldn't call themselves an author, because they absolutely are. If they're still, like, to me, working toward making it a career, whether it's, you know, indie pub, self-pubbed, traditionally pubbed, it's all writing for a career. And that to me is kind of when it flips from just being a writer and doing it as a hobby and just enjoying writing and then being an author. It's just like, oh, now I'm in a career. Whether I have a second job, because, you know, a lot of writing doesn't pay the bills, you know, but that's kind of in my head, like when that switch happens. And I don't look at someone who is successfully, you know, continuously self-pubbing as like, they're not really an author. I don't think that way at all. And if I actually put in the work to self-pub, I would consider myself an author, but I did not. I literally wrote first drafts, did minimal editing, and just threw it out there. I did not do the work that was necessary. So I'm like, that doesn't count for me in my head.
And I also find it interesting too, that delineation between author and writer, in the way that Jessica was saying, like, hey, I'm a writer. When can you call yourself that? As a freelance writer as well, there's a further shift, because when I ghostwrite or I write for other people, I don't consider myself an author of that work. I consider myself a writer. So even if you aren't exactly pursuing self-publication or traditional publishing within your own writing, like things that you've come up with on your own, you can still call yourself a writer at that point. And you don't necessarily have to, you know, writer with a capital W. You don't necessarily have to call yourself an author. If you're doing the writing, I would say call yourself a writer.
Was curious for you guys when you mentioned writer with a capital W. I agree. I think that as I was younger, I was definitely lowercase writer. And as I, you know, grew and matured or started writing online or publishing with online magazines, et cetera, then I was, you know, capital W writer. And it definitely shifted from something that I did for, you know, just my own pleasure to something that I was doing for a greater reason. But I'm curious for you, and I think this is where a lot of the distinction comes in, and maybe what Jessica is talking about too, is I've always self-identified as a writer. And there's a point in my life where I went, oh, okay, this is a thing I'm going to do. And it's going to be something that I try to do to supplement, you know, payments or bills or whatever it might be. This is a career path I'm taking, right? It's a lot easier for me to say that to myself internally than the first time you meet somebody and they go, oh, what do you do? And you go, oh, hi, I'm Julie Xantopoulos, I'm a writer. Or hi, I'm Julie Xantopoulos and I'm an author. And it's like, that's a whole different level of ownership and the power that comes from that, the like empowerment that comes from finally saying out loud, instead of it being this thing that you are harboring, this creative like passion that you have within yourself. The first time you say that to somebody, or you introduce yourself that way, or you allow that to be an identifier when you're meeting somebody, is so powerful. And I encourage everybody, if you feel like you're at that point, or you're ready to take writing seriously and kind of go the extra mile to go forward with your career as a writer, to start saying that and to start getting more comfortable saying that when you meet people. Because the shift in my own mindset, like, I didn't realize how badly I needed to claim that to other people for it to really sink in for myself. And then it became a huge self-motivator for me. Like, I'm already very self-motivated, but as soon as I claimed that outwardly to others, it became like oh, okay, like, it's time to get serious, because like, I'm now at a point where I'm comfortable claiming this to others. So that was like a really big moment for me the first time I was able to say that to somebody. Like, do you remember the first time you said that to somebody? And did you feel that same sense of ownership and empowerment when you finally claimed like outwardly to others.
And I think it's important too. And I will go on that, but saying that to someone you don't know is so much different than saying it like to your parents or your siblings. And if that's where you need to start, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But that first time you say it to an acquaintance or a stranger, I've definitely felt that like a little bit of that power, coming inside of me, like, oh my God, it's like so real when you can say that to someone and you can be like, here, this is my website and here are my books. Or in your instance, Julie, like, here's my magazine or here's my flash fiction website or anything like that. I think it's definitely given myself a little bit of that motivation as well to like keep going, so that say the next time you meet that person, you could just talk about, how you're still a writer, still an author, still publishing or self-publishing.
I'm not sure I've ever done that, to be honest. The only time I've come close to saying something like that was at a literal writing retreat where everyone was writers, and so it was not the same as, oh, I'm a writer. It's kind of implied that you're there, that you're a writer when I went to Highlights. And I think that I still have a trouble claiming it to even people I know, especially people I know, like at work. And like I've told people like, oh yeah, I've written a couple of books. I don't say like, oh, I'm an author, I'm a writer. I'm like, I've written a couple of books. And they're like, wow, where can I find it? I'm like, you can't. Don't even try. Please don't. And then the problem is I told that to my boss because his wife is an author and she writes nonfiction, like self-help type books. And he's very proud of that for her. And so he tries to be very proud of that for me. And he'll tell people like, she's a writer. And I'm like, don't tell people that, please. I don't want them to find those books. I don't know why it's so uncomfortable for me it would be easier for me just if I was like at a convention to be like, oh, I'm a writer, I'm an author, but to be with people that I work with and who could possibly read it and then talk to me about it, no.
That's funny. I actually, in a book club that I was a part of, they actually ended up reading my book in secret and then wanted to discuss it at a meeting. And that was horrifying, but I eventually got into it. But yeah, talking about it with people that you know is a whole lot different than acquaintances or strangers.
I would die. I would just curl up into a ball and be like, kill me now, please.
There was wine involved, so I have to say that I was okay at that point.
That helps. That definitely helps. By the time this episode has come out, because at the time of filming, it hasn't come out, but by the time that we filmed, the announcement of my publication deal, it has come out. And so it is, as I went forward with that process, I was like totally fine with the idea of the support of the book community that I have around me reading the book. It was a very different thing for like, I felt physically ill thinking about family and friends reading the book. I was like, just don't like buy it to support me, but then like never read it. Like let it collect dust. I can't handle looking you in the face and knowing you read the book. And I know that that's a feeling that will hopefully leave. Like it did eventually with my other book that I self-published. A very proud moment for me when I introduce myself to people I haven't met before as a writer. It can be very empowering, but it can be very nerve-wracking as well, because especially if you don't go a very traditional route with your publishing is not an area that a ton of people know a lot about. So as soon as you say like, I'm a writer, and they're like, oh, where can I buy your books? Like, I've never seen you in Barnes and Noble. And you're no. Like there's so many ways to publish now. So I think it's one of those things that people might be a little hesitant to claim because they don't think that they're traditionally successful. And then you have to explain yourself to people. But I do encourage you that if you are a capital W writer or author, to claim it as soon as you feel comfortable, because I do think that there is a power in that.
Now, once you start to take the writer with a capital and you're thinking about taking the author, do you think that not like having imposter syndrome or self-doubt or something can actually be the cause of making you not want to take author? Because you're like, I'm not good at this. I shouldn't be calling myself that. you think that's why a lot of people don't want? I mean, that's probably a lot of the reason why it's hard for me, is because if somebody reads it, I'm gonna be like, they're gonna hate it. So because I suck. So what's the point of telling them?
I think it definitely has some merit, because even as an author with a capital A that I consider myself, I still have imposter syndrome about talking to people about it. So it's just one of those things that happens. And I think if in some way you feel like you're ready to claim it but are unsure, I would, unpack those feelings a little bit and maybe start with someone and say, hey, by the way, I wrote, a series of books that maybe you hadn't told them before, and just maybe test it out a little bit, if that's helpful.
And I think it's helpful to know that it makes me want to puke. I think it's helpful to know too that along the journey and along the road of writing, whether it's, lowercase to uppercase to author, that feelings of self-doubt and like imposter syndrome that will creep up at all different parts of the process. But I do think that that's normal. I think that's something that everybody has to battle with at some point in their career at like all different stages. So I don't think you should expect that ever leaves you. But again, I think that the imposter syndrome and the self-doubt does start to leave you a little bit once you take ownership of it. Any other thoughts surrounding the topic?
No, just, you have to decide for yourself. Nobody can give you that, classification. They can't. And someone can tell me I'm an author and I'll be like, no, sorry. You don't know what you're talking about.
I agree. I think it's something that you need to claim for yourself and just determine when you're comfortable, but testing it out with close family or friends, or, even if it's easier with strangers, I think it's important to go ahead and take that step as soon as you feel ready. So our question for the episode is, have you claimed the title of writer yet? And if so, how, and how did it make you feel? Hopefully you guys can take that next step in your writing journey and claim that title for yourselves. That's going to be it for this episode. We will see you in the next episode. Bye.
Yeah, so I think of it similarly. Is that how you say that? Similarly.
There you go.
I think, okay, let's start over. Cut that out. Okay. I mean, I kind of look at it, why can I not say it?
In a similar way, would that help?
I'm going to just change what I'm going to say. Ready?
We lost you, Julie.
Look on her face. Her grandmother probably unplugged the internet.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's normal. Nope. I am not a teenage boy.
Normal.
Normal.